Let me ask you something gently. Have you ever said no, and then couldn't stop thinking about it afterward? Replay the conversation a dozen times in your head. Wonder if you were too harsh. Feel that deep knot in your chest, like you did something wrong, just by protecting your own peace. That's guilt. But here's the thing, not all guilt means you did something bad. Sometimes, guilt is a response you were trained to feel, by people who wanted you to stay small, quiet, and easy to manage. And if you're a woman over 60, you probably know exactly what I mean. We were raised in a time when being good meant being selfless. Smile. Don't cause trouble. Keep the peace. Give up your needs so no one gets upset. But what happens when you do start honoring your needs? Suddenly, you're selfish. Too emotional. Hard to talk to. And that's when the guilt creeps in, even if you've done nothing wrong. Let's take something simple. Maybe your adult son asks for money. Again. And this time, your gut says no. Not because you don't love him, but because it's starting to feel like a pattern. So you say, gently, I can't do that this month. And he sighs. Goes quiet. Maybe even says, fine. I guess I'll figure it out. No yelling. No fight. Just enough silence to make you feel terrible. And then, the spiral begins. Maybe you lie awake that night wondering if you were too cold. Maybe you open your wallet the next day and send it anyway, just to stop the ache. That's not love. That's emotional pressure. And when emotional pressure becomes familiar, guilt starts showing up in places it doesn't belong. Here's another one. You set a boundary with your partner. Maybe you say, please don't raise your voice at me like that. It shuts me down. And instead of hearing you, they say, wow, I guess I can't say anything anymore without you getting upset. Or worse, they pout, walk off, or give you the cold shoulder for the rest of the evening. You start feeling like you're the problem, just for asking for respect. That's not your fault. That guilt you're carrying? It didn't come from your values. It came from the way you were treated, like your boundaries were a burden. You may have learned, over time, that speaking up leads to disconnection. So guilt becomes a kind of early warning system. Don't rock the boat, or you'll be alone. But here's the truth. That's not real connection if it only exists when you're bending over backwards. Real love doesn't punish you for having limits. It listens. It adjusts. It respects your truth, even if it's inconvenient. If no one ever taught you that, it's not your fault. And if you're just now starting to see it, that's not too late. That's healing. We've been told for decades to be the bigger person. But sometimes, that just meant swallow your feelings so they don't have to deal with theirs. And that's where guilt festers. So today, I want to gently invite you to look at guilt with a little more compassion. Not as a sign you're bad or broken. But as a signal, something's out of balance. Guilt can show up when you've broken a toxic rule, not a moral one. Like the rule that says, don't upset dad. Or, don't make your grown daughter uncomfortable. But that's not peace. That's silence. And silence can cost you your self-worth. So if you're carrying guilt just for having needs, or for saying no, or for not being who someone else wanted you to be, let's pause. You're not wrong. You're not too much. You're not selfish. You're just learning how to come back to yourself. And that's brave. Let's keep going. Because the next piece of this, how guilt gets used against you, might be the key to setting yourself free. Let's talk about how guilt gets used as a tool, not by accident, but on purpose. Because sometimes, the people around you know guilt works on you. And they lean on it. They don't have to yell or slam doors. They just sigh, go quiet, say things like, well, I wouldn't need help if I had someone who really cared. Or, I guess I'll just do it myself, again. And just like that, you're the one who feels bad. Even if you were the one being disrespected. Even if you were the one giving, until you had nothing left. Sound familiar? A woman I spoke with, let's call her Linda, told me this story. She's 67. Smart. Kind. Spent her whole life being the go-to person in her family. One day, she finally said no to her daughter, who constantly dropped off the grandkids without asking. Linda said, "I need a weekend to myself. I'm exhausted." Her daughter's face changed. She didn't argue. She just said, "Okay. I guess I'll cancel my plans then," and left. No fight. Just that quiet disappointment. That sting. And Linda sat in her kitchen wondering if she'd just ruined everything. That's how guilt takes root. Not through screaming, through silence. Through the subtle messages that say, your needs hurt people. But let me tell you something, gently but clearly. Your needs are not a burden. Your rest is not selfish. Your no is not unkind. It's not your job to carry someone else's discomfort just so they don't have to grow. Now, how do you start loosening the grip of guilt? First, when you feel that familiar guilt creeping in, pause. Put your hand over your heart, even if that feels silly. Take a breath. And ask yourself, did I hurt someone? Or did I just disappoint someone who's used to getting their way? There's a big difference. Hurt means you were unkind. Disappointment just means you didn't comply. And you're allowed to disappoint people who expect too much. Another thing, when someone tries to guilt you, it often sounds like a twist on love. You don't care about me. If you loved me, you would. After everything I've done for you. It can make your heart ache. You feel pulled, not by love, but by obligation. But love doesn't keep score. Love says, I want you to be well, even if it means I don't get what I want right now. If someone is keeping track, measuring your worth by how often you say yes, that's not love. That's control dressed up in sweet words. Here's something small you can say when guilt gets used against you. I care about you, but I also need to take care of myself. You don't have to justify. You don't have to over-explain. Sometimes that sentence alone is enough to shift your own nervous system back into truth. And I know, this feels hard. Especially when it's your kids. Especially when you were raised to put everyone else first. But the truth is, healthy relationships don't come from guilt. They come from respect. So if someone can only stay close to you when you're exhausted, giving in, and saying yes every time, that's not closeness. That's control. And again, that's not your fault. You were shaped by a world that told you being good meant disappearing. But now? You're allowed to reappear. Fully. Gently. Honestly. You're allowed to let go of guilt that never belonged to you. And I know, sometimes the guilt doesn't make sense. You know in your head you did nothing wrong, but your body still tenses up. Your stomach flips. Your mind starts racing. That's okay. That's just an old survival pattern playing itself out. So next time you feel that wave of guilt, don't argue with it. Don't shame yourself for feeling it. Just pause. Breathe. And say gently to yourself, I'm allowed to say no. I'm allowed to rest. I'm allowed to change. Because you are. Let's take this deeper, into what happens after the guilt. When you try to heal, but someone keeps pulling you back in. That's next. And it matters. So what happens when you do set the boundary? You say no. You speak up. You finally do something for yourself. And instead of peace, you feel even more guilt. That's what I want to talk about now, the aftershock. Because here's the thing, when you start standing up for yourself, it doesn't always feel good at first. Sometimes, it feels like you're doing something wrong. Why? Because your nervous system was trained to keep the peace. To avoid conflict. To make sure everyone else was okay, even if you weren't. So when you finally say, I can't do this anymore. Or, this doesn't work for me. Your body goes into panic mode. You might second-guess yourself. Replay the conversation over and over. Worry that you were too harsh, even when you were calm and kind. This is normal. It doesn't mean you were wrong. It means you're healing. And healing often feels uncomfortable before it feels strong. There's one woman I remember, let's call her Diane. She told me after setting a simple boundary with her brother, she didn't sleep for 3 nights. She kept checking her phone, waiting for a message from him. He'd always made her feel like she was the difficult one. But this time, she didn't chase. She sat with the silence. And after a few days, something shifted. Not with him, he never replied. But inside her. She realized she could survive someone else's disappointment. And still respect herself. That's a big moment, when you stop begging for someone's approval, and start honoring your truth. You might still feel the guilt. You might still worry. But there's a quiet strength underneath it now. Let me say this clearly. Feeling guilty doesn't mean you are guilty. It just means you're going against an old pattern. And that pattern is losing its grip. So what helps in those moments? Sometimes it's the smallest thing. Write down one sentence that brings you back to center. Something like, my worth is not tied to how much I give. Or, I'm allowed to make choices that protect my peace. Or even, just because they're upset doesn't mean I did something wrong. Keep that sentence close. Say it out loud. Let it land. Another thing, let yourself grieve. Yes, grieve. Because when you start healing from guilt-based relationships, you're also letting go of a fantasy. The fantasy that if you just loved hard enough, tried hard enough, bent far enough, they'd finally treat you right. Letting go of that dream can feel like a loss. But what you gain in return? Yourself. You gain space to breathe. To rest. To finally hear your own voice again, not the one that apologizes all the time. The one that says, I matter too. And maybe that feels new. Maybe even a little scary. But it's real. And it's yours. So if today, you're feeling guilty for saying no, or for not showing up the way someone expected you to, or for finally putting yourself first after decades of putting everyone else ahead, breathe. You're not wrong. You're not selfish. You're not too much. You're just remembering that you're human. And that being human means you get to have needs. You get to have limits. You get to have a life that feels like yours again. No one has the right to use guilt to control your love. Love should feel safe. Honest. Free. You've given enough. Now it's time to come home to yourself. And if no one's told you lately, you're doing better than you think. You're not broken. You're rebuilding. And you deserve peace. Not guilt. If this speaks to you, you're not alone. Feel free to share your story below. There's a whole community here walking this path too, step by step.